Hello and welcome to New Frontiers on CCTV International. I'm Ji Xiaojun in Beijing. And today we're continuing with our series about the excavation at the Jiahu site. Now, the archaeological site at Jiahu near the Yellow River in Henan province has yielded a remarkable trove of cultural relics. In an excavation carried out in 1986, archaeologists unearthed many priceless burial items ranging from pottery to tortoise shells. The leader of the team was Zhang Juzhong, and he was particularly fascinated by some bone tubes. Similar items had been found in other archaeological sites along the Yellow River, but nothing so exquisitely crafted as those at Jiahu. Zhang sensed that perhaps he and his team had stumbled on some ancient mystery. He decided to start his investigation by studying the tortoise shells, believing that these might provide some clue as to what the bone tubes were used for.
In the Song dynasty, Sima Guang wrote historical events retold as a mirror for government. In it, he recounts the story of Duke Zhou resorting to divination using tortoises to relieve the anxieties of King Wu of Zhou concerning whether he would recover from a serious illness. Were the tortoise shells uncovered at Jiahu used for divination? There are 360 crustaceans, the foremost of which is the tortoise. The ancient ancestors of today's Chinese believed that of all the animals, the tortoise best understood the purposes of humans. As they were the most long-lived animal, they were thought to possess great wisdom. The writer of the Yellow River chart and the Luo River document, legendary sources for the I Ching, supposedly relied on written materials provided to him by a divine tortoise. Scholars who study the evolution of human knowledge attribute the origin of such worship to the use of tortoises as food. Whenever indigenous Americans hunted and killed a fierce animal, they would eat its liver, as they believed that in this way they could acquire superhuman strength. The lakes and marshlands around Jiahu were an ideal nesting ground for tortoises. A large number of broken tortoise shells recovered from ash heaps at the Jiahu site, and from the abundance of fishing and hunting gear recovered from the grave sites in the area, one can safely conclude that the original inhabitants of the Jiahu area regularly caught and ate tortoises. Li Shijian, a Ming Dynasty doctor who wrote Compendium of Materia Medica, wrote that the flesh, blood and skin of tortoises had medicinal uses. He claimed that they were beneficial for the stomach and intestines, helped cure injuries and had a detoxifying effect, and he added that eating tortoises helped one maintain good health. The pursuit of good health and long life by the Neolithic age people of Jiahu through the consumption of tortoises probably led to tortoise worship. At the same time, natural phenomena that had a great influence on the farming and herding practices of primitive peoples, including those at Jiahu, led them to believe that phenomena outside their control were manipulated by supernatural beings. This not only led to the birth of religion, but also to the appearance of sorcerers who used various means to foretell the future. Tortoises were considered the best intermediaries for this kind of divination.
过去我们知道殷墟的甲骨文，殷墟它的用的龟甲、占卜上面刻甲骨文，这个后来发现大汶口文化有大量的用龟现象。这个用龟现象呢，应该说是龟灵崇拜的一个象征。这龟灵崇拜是最早的崇拜形式之一。 是一种精灵崇拜，它在原始人的意识形态里边具有非常重要的这个地位，因为什么呢？因为我们知道这个用龟现象，这龟灵崇拜现象对后来的这个中华民族的这个文化的影响还是很大的。我们到汉代以后形成这个四神、四灵，其中一个不就是龟吗？
From the looks of things, the person buried in grave M233 was a tribal sorcerer who specialized in foretelling the future, and he used tortoises to do so. This raises the possibility that the bone tubes with holes in them were somehow used in similar rituals. Primitive people selected the materials for ritual instruments with great care. If these bone tubes were used in rituals, then what kind of materials would these people have considered most appropriate? Zhang Zhuzhong received a letter from Ho Lianhai, an ornithologist at the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology. He stated that after inspecting the bone tube sent to him, he could confidently state that it was made from the leg bone of a red-crowned crane. Zhang Zhuzhong recalled that a grave dating from the Han Dynasty had been discovered on the east side of Jiahu village. The door of the coffin chamber was emblazoned with the images of two divine animal figures. One was a tortoise with its head raised, and the other was a crane with its wings spread. That evening, in the temporary accommodation arranged for the archaeologists at the local elementary school, Zhang Zhuzhong looked through all the materials he had on Neolithic artifacts. What was the purpose of the holes? What did they signify? By mid-autumn, the water table at Jiahu village was rising quickly. Zhang Zhuzhong and his colleagues knew that they would have to work quickly to complete their work on the graves. Then suddenly, an archaeologist working on grave M253 made an astonishing discovery. Buried next to the skeleton in the grave were two bone tubes. One of them had not 7, but 8 holes. Although grave M253 was badly damaged, the unique bone tube was miraculously intact. This was the first time Zhang Zhuzhong had seen a bone tube with 8 holes. The tube was 22.7 centimeters long, and it was round and smooth, bright and shiny. A mark had been cut into it between the top and the first hole. This was not some accidentally made mark, but some kind of symbol, the meaning of which was unclear. After the bone tube was cleaned up, it was noticed that each hole had a small mark next to it. It was as if these marks had been placed there when planning where to make the holes. The distance between every 2 holes was different. At that time, society was still in a primitive stage of development, and it had supposedly not yet developed a system of weights and measures. If this were the case, how would they have been measuring the placement of the holes? Were the symbols meaningless, or had they been placed there for a specific purpose?
Before Zhang Zhuzhong had time to figure out a solution to the problem, the rising water table forced the team to stop work. All they could do was gather up their belongings and head home for the winter.
Back at home, Zhang Zhuzhong couldn't relax. The mystery of the bone tubes and other unanswered questions kept him thinking constantly. He couldn't wait until the arrival of spring, when the water would recede. As if fate had been prodded by his impatience, soon after returning to the Jiahu site, in grave M344, Zhang Zhuzhong discovered another set of tortoise shells and a pair of bone tubes. As he was cleaning up the two newly discovered bone tubes, Zhang Juzhong could clearly see that these two 7-holed dark brown bone tubes also bore marks next to the holes. But these marks were slightly different from those on the tubes from grave M253. One of these tubes had 3 marks about 1 millimeter apart beside a small hole. It seemed as if minute corrections had been made after the first mark was made. What was it about these holes that required the people who made them to be accurate to within 1 millimeter? When the corpse was buried in grave M344, the head was already missing. A pile of tortoise shells had been placed where the head should have been. The symbols carved on the shells were unlike any ever seen before. One could clearly discern that these symbols were in the shape of an eye. Other tortoise shells and objects also bore the same symbol. Could these symbols be related to the inscriptions on tortoise shells and animal bones of the Shang dynasty, an early dynasty that existed in China from the 16th century BC to the 11th century BC?
它是一种原始文字，具有，也就是说，换句话说，就是具有文字性质的符号，具有文字性质的符号，或者是叫原始文字。它既不是成熟的文字，也不是简单的记号，不是简单的符号，它应该是，当然，文字本身也是符号嘛，记录语言的符号。那么这些文字呢，是不是可以记录语言？当时是不是已经有了语言？这个东西现在谁也说不清楚，这就是考古学的局限性，但是这个寄托了人们的一定的含义，这个恐怕是应该是可以肯定的。
The more than 30 burial articles unearthed from grave M344 included bone, pottery and stone utensils used in everyday life. The man who was buried in the grave had been in the prime of his life, and he had clearly held an important position in society, even though he was headless. There has been a tradition of cutting off the heads of prominent individuals and worshipping their skulls among some Aboriginal Polynesian peoples. The people of northeast New Guinea, for example, placed the heads of tribal chiefs on wooden effigies and were